What's up everyone? So today I'm going to be using and talking about the Zorn palette. Now the Zorn palette comes from an artist from the 1800s called Anders Zorn. He was believed to only use four colors, which are cadmium red, titanium white, ivory black, and yellow ochre. There is some debate about whether he used a bit of blue in it or not, as some people have said they discovered in his work. However, I'll leave all that information and that debate up to you to research on your own if you're really interested. Now, one of the reasons why this palette is so popular because Zorn was able to produce a great amount of masterpieces using this limited palette of just four colors. Many other artists were able to achieve the same results also. So it has lasted throughout this time. And today I'm going to be showing you how I've used it and also the many different skin tones you can get from using the Zorn palette, which only has four colors in it. So what I'm going to be doing is taking you guys through my color mixing method with the Zorn palette, and also I'm going to be demonstrating how I applied it to this painting of Zendaya right here, and the many different tones that I've got, the many different colors I was able to pull out. This whole portrait here is done only with the Zorn palette, no other colors added. So I'm going to show you how I achieved that, along with my final thoughts and whether it's right for you to use. So of course, before we get into that, I need you guys to do me a big favor. Support the channel by simply just liking, but most importantly, subscribing. We're trying to hit that 5K mark, 5K and beyond. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. All right, let's get into mixing our colors here. So of course, we're going to use our cadmium red light. Then we're going to get our yellow ochre. Then we're going to go with our ivory black. And then lastly, our titanium white. So there we have our four colors right here that we're going to work off of, and we're going to go for the pale skin tone or really light, the light skin tone, tan brownish skin tone. We're going to go for dark skin tones, and then just random colors and shades and highlights that you can use. So we're going to mix a base color for all of these, and then we're going to tint it more towards red, tint it more towards yellow ochre, more towards ivory black, more towards titanium white. Let's start off with our base color for the pale / really light skin tone. So of course this is going to be predominantly white. However, we do want a bit of a tint to it. So we're going to add in some cadmium red first. Cadmium red is a very powerful color, so you don't need to go crazy with it and add too much of it from the jump. Start off with a little bit. Then our yellow ochre. Again, when mixing, I would highly suggest you start off with a small amount and work your way up to the desired color that you want. Don't go crazy and mix a big bunch in, and then it ends up being not what you're looking for, because you can always add more to a color, but you obviously can't take out or take away. So here we pretty much have a pale orangish type of color, but of course we need it to be more brown, and that's where the ivory black will come in and act as brown. But also, since there's a small tint of blue in it, it will also bring down some of the chroma in the paint that we have mixed right here. So this pretty much looks like a flesh tint or pale rose blush so far. So we're going to mix in some of that ivory black. We're just going to start off with a small tiny bit. Just a small bit like that. Just to bring down some of that chroma You can already see it coming down a bit from that small, tiny amount I put in. Now, since this is pale slash really light, I'm going to add in some more white to it. But the skin color we mixed so far is usable, but it's not exactly what I'm looking for right off the top. So I'm just going to add more titanium white to the mixture. This is a bit better, but we can definitely add more white to it. So add a little bit more white. And there we have our base color for the pale slash really light. We can actually get more white than that, but we're going to keep it there for now and manipulate the color as we go along. Now, let's tint it towards more of the red side. So we'll grab some of our base, and then we'll grab just a touch more of cadmium red. And this will probably take us back to our pale rose-ish type of color. But we're going to tint it more towards the red. So we're going to manipulate it that way and get it more towards a more vibrant type of skin tone. And as you can see here, the change between the two when you add in that cadmium red. Now from here, you can add in a bit more or you can keep it like this. I'm just going to add in a touch more and see how that goes. If it's too overpowered, then you can even it out with some ivory black, add in a bit more white. So that's pretty good for me. And there is our pale skin tone tinted more towards the red side. We'll add that to our swatch. Now, next, we're going to be working with the yellow ochre from our base, and we're going to tint it towards a yellow type of skin tone from the pale. So we add in our base, and then now we're going to grab some yellow ochre and again mix it in. It's almost greenish, like a very light green, which is used commonly in skin tones, especially when you're working with Caucasian flesh. So this is something you can definitely use. It's a little bit too vibrant, so gonna add some white to it. Gonna just add a small touch of the ivory black to bring down the chroma. And here is more of the tone that I want. So there we have our yellow ochre tint. Even though we manipulated it a bit with the black and the white, it's more towards the yellow side. And of course, if you want to add more to it, you can. However, we want to keep this kind of pale, so we're not going to make it too vibrant. We're going to leave it right here. And that'll be our swatch for that. All right, next we're gonna take our base again, and this time we're gonna add a bit more black to it. So again, just start off with a touch. And what it produced is a bluish kind of gray color. So it produced like a warm color. Now, depending on your reference or what type of portrait you're painting, this may work, this may not work. Just looking at this right off the top, I would use this in some sort of shadows and leading into dark areas also. That's how I would use this color. But just typically, you probably wouldn't find this in portraits. But like I said, it all depends on your reference that you're working off of. So with mostly black, that's what we got there. Next up, we're gonna take our base again, and we're gonna mix in some white. We're gonna manipulate it to the more white side. And like I said, you can tint this depending on your desired amount, your reference, whatever look you're going for. This is just a basic showing and understanding of what you can do with these 4 colors based on the various different skin tones. So here we have it more towards the white, and this looks more of a pale skin tones. So there we have it with mostly white, and you can see how it compares to our base color. And there it is. All right, next we're gonna go into our light tone. So we're gonna start it off with white. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab some of the cadmium red. I'm gonna grab a bit more than the first time around. And the reason is because we wanna go darker than before. Grab some of the cad yellow, and I'm gonna work from here. So here is the base that I'm going to be working off of. And then I'm going to be manipulating it based on the previous swatches I did. So with the red, yellow, black, and of course the white. So let's start off with the red. Mix in a bit more red, and we're going to see how it changes from there. So there we have it, tinted more towards red. A bit different than the first go around. Now we're going to tint it towards the yellow ochre. And there we have it. Now we're going to tint it towards the black. I'm just going to dab a bit since last time it was a bit too much. So see, just a small touch of black like that, maybe even a little bit more. There we have it, tinted more towards the black. Just took the last bit of base that we had there and then added in some white. Now we're going to see what we get from here. There we have it. We're going to go for our tan/brown skin tones. So, of course, we start off with our cad red. Start off with our yellow ochre. Add a bit more in there. And this time, since we're not doing anything light from the jump for our base color, we're going to add in a bit of the ivory black. Then from there, we're going to put a touch of the titanium white. So there we have our base for our tan/brown. Now, the same way we did the others, let's manipulate it and tint it more towards these four colors here. So of course, again, start off with our cadmium red. Can actually add a bit more red here. And that's what we got. Now let's take that base again, and this time we're going to go more of the yellow ochre type of side. There we go with our yellow ochre. Next, we're going to take some of our base again. And we're going to add a touch of ivory black to it. This should make it a little bit more darker and brown, which will lead in to our darker skin tones. Can actually add a bit more black. That's almost too much, so I'm just going to put that aside. Now, if you ever run into a problem like this where it's just a little bit too dark, all you have to do is grab some of the cad red, grab some of the yellow, and that should bring it right back around or to a decent color that's more of what you desire. I can actually add that back in. There we go, tinted more towards the ivory black. Now lastly, we're just going to take the little bit of base that we have left and we're going to tint it more towards the white side. So there it is, our brown tinted more towards the white side. Lastly, for our skin tones, we're going to do the dark skin tones. So we're going to start off with our cad red, then our yellow ochre. We're going to put a little bit more ivory black this time. And we're going to just put a touch of titanium white. And we're going to mix it from here. Now what I'm trying to get is pretty much a dark, rich brown as the base that I can work from there and manipulate towards any of the other tints that I want. So there we have our base for the dark skin tones. And now we're gonna use it and tint it towards these various different colors and see what we can get from there. Let's go ahead and tint it with the cad red. And this should lighten it up a bit to a light brown. Let's mix this with more yellow ochre. We're going to add in some more ivory black, just a small bit. Can actually do a bit more. The titanium white. There we go. These are just some basic base colors that you can mix and the various ways that you can manipulate them to be more red, more yellow, more on the black side or more on the white side. Typically when I do these mixtures, I still keep the colors I started out with on my palette so I can adjust as I go along or adjust as I go along according to my reference or just to my liking pretty much. Some shadows, highlights, and just some random colors that you can mix using these 4 colors. So let's start off with one of my favorites actually, which is a variation of green. Start off with our yellow ochre. And what some of you might not know is that when you combine yellow and ivory black, it makes a tint of green. Why is that? Because like I said before, ivory black is actually a cool black. So it tints more towards the blue side. And of course, blue and yellow makes green. So we're gonna add more yellow ochre here. And then from here, we have a variation of green. It's more of like a forest green, more of a darkish type of green. So you want to lighten it up a bit, no problem. Add in some of your titanium white. And then there you go. And there's your green. And the green is good for using it in the light skin tones. You can even use it in the dark sometimes. But typically when I use the green, it's in the light skin tones and I use it as the shadows. Next, gonna mix together a color that's pretty obvious and easy to mix. Orange. Of course, your yellow, then you're gonna use your cad red. Depending on more if you want it to be a yellowish orange or a reddish orange. That's up to you which one of the 2 paints you put more. But for this demonstration, I just put equal parts. And then there we get our orange. Let's say now you want more of a warm gray. We can go ahead and mix that. So we start off with our ivory black. Just a small touch of cad red to warm things up. Then we're going to use some titanium white, equal parts to the ivory black. And this should give us a warm gray. More on the lighter side, but definitely more warm. Now, if you want it tinted more brownish, you can say, go ahead and grab your yellow ochre and mix it in. That's still not warm enough, so what I'm going to do is add some more of the yellow ochre there. And then see the results from there. Now that looks similar to the green, so what we're going to do is just a touch of cad red. And that should bring things around. What we can even do is just a small touch of ivory black also. And there we have more of our warm gray. This looks almost the equivalent to mixing a raw umber and white, or depending how much you mix in, a burnt umber and white. There we have it. Now here's our swatch with our different skin tones and how they can be manipulated and tinted towards each of the colors that we started off with. Now let's apply this to some practical work and see how each of these mix together and the results we can get. I'm going to show you guys working with the lighter skin tones, and I'm also going to show you guys about working with the darker skin tones so you can see how all of these tones here work together and how it all comes together. As I typically do for my painting process, I start off with my underpainting, and this is just to lay in some of the values, those dark tones, those mid tones, and those highlights. So first thing first, we're going to use the LiQWYD to add in the first layer. When I use the LiQWYD for my first layer, it's because it's fast drying and I don't have to wait too long between adding my layers. So I always use LiQWYD first, just for my base layer typically. And with this, I'm just adding in where I want the colors to be, and I'm getting an idea of how the portrait is going to form together. I'm also going to be mixing the tones right on the palette as opposed to pre-mixing them and then painting from there. At this part of my process, I just want a general idea of the color placement and where some of these tones are going to be. And here I'm just mixing in my darker tones, which I'm going to start applying to the neck and seeing how it all comes together from there. Now, initially looking at this, you might be thinking, well, how would I even use a green shadow into my skin tones? And I'm going to show you guys exactly where it would apply. So somewhere here, like the dark shadow area, is where it would blend into that darker brown, that darker shadow. Now, keep in mind, I did say that it works best when doing Caucasian light flesh tones, I find. So here we have a mix of different flesh tones or different tones in the skin, and we can use that to apply to our shadow areas. So as previous, we know we achieve that by getting our yellow ochre and getting a touch of our ivory black, and we mix it and we get this green type of shade. And this will act as a mid-tone. You can adjust it as you go along. That's pretty good enough for me. So I would be using it around here, and then it would go into that darker brown. That concludes this portion. So now we let it dry. It typically dries 24 to 48 hours, dry to the touch. Then we go in with our other layers and we really saturate the colors more and bring everything together. Now I'm going to go in with my next layer. I mixed some of the skin tones here already, still using the Zorn palette. However, even though I already pre-mixed some, I still keep the original colors just in case I need to tint anything to a certain side, of the color. Then I have it right on hand and I can do that right on the palette. I basically just did this just to kind of quick step everything, kind of expedite the process a bit. Now, this time around, I'm going to be using my mixture of Stan Oil and Gamsol, and I'm going to be oiling in, and I'm going to be filling these colors in. This is just part of the process of how all these colors came together. And if you would like to see the full portrait of this painting, you can click up here to see the time lapse. So here's a painting where I used the Zorn palette on the skin tones, and you can see the variations of skin tones that I got on this painting. So if we look, of course, we have the dark skin tone, which has a bit more yellow and a bit more green in it. Then we have the Caucasian flesh tone with more yellow in it. Then we have one with more red. Then we have the dark skin tone, which is just primarily dark. Another dark skin tone with more red in it. Then we have the Caucasian skin tone again, where it's mostly white. So this is just to show you guys all the different types of colors and skin tones that you can get from the Zorn palette. Also, the money there that you see, that's also mixed with the ivory black and yellow ochre. What do I gotta say about the Zorn palette, and do I recommend it to you, or should you be using it? My final thoughts on the Zorn palette is that it's a great palette. I use it in various situations where if I want a portrait to be more moody, or if I just don't want to be using a bunch of different colors, I will tend to lean towards the Zorn palette. I find that it gives me that more dramatic look that I'm trying to achieve in some portraits. However, the only drawback is that sometimes it doesn't have that vibrancy, and I find when I'm using that yellow ochre, I don't really get that hard hitting punch of yellow like I would with a cadmium yellow. So that's one of the things I don't like about the Zorn palette, is that it's hard to really achieve some of those high contrasted yellow tones that you may get in some portraits based on your reference. So if I'm using it, I tend to use it more towards things that aren't really saturated, and I find I get the best results that way. Now, this painting was done in the typical palette that I use, and you can find the link for that in the description. So I'm gonna compare it alongside the Zorn palette of this portrait right here. Now, like I said about the yellows, if you look here, I was able to achieve that high contrasted bright yellow, whereas in some of these areas here, you can only go so far. For me, I was greatly impressed on how much colors I was able to pull out of just using these 4 colors. And when you look at the palette initially, you wouldn't even think that you can get such a range of colors just from using this limited palette. And I was able to pretty much match any skin tone that I wanted to match. Also, if there was a skin tone that I wanted to tweak in a certain direction and I wanted to change it up a bit, I was able to do that. So I was greatly impressed about how versatile I was able to be with this limited palette. The Zorn palette is not something that I would completely replace the palette that I'm currently working with. However, it is something that I will keep in my arsenal, that I will utilize every now and then, depending on my reference or depending on what I'm trying to achieve in the painting. Now, for you guys, if you should use it or not, that completely depends on what type of look you're going for your painting, and also what type of style you use. I find using the Zorn palette works great when I'm working loose. That's just me. However, if you want to do a more tight, more detailed painting, of course you can achieve some great results with that. So my recommendation is to absolutely try this palette out, see how it goes for you. So give this palette a try, test it out, see how you like it, and who knows, it can be your main palette that you use. Whatever way you go, keep painting, keep being creative. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.